As it was announced that he'll be stepping down from his position this week, former prime ministerial spokesperson and Israel's ambassador to the UK, Mark Regev, joins us live. I'm Michael Dixon, and this is Stand With Us Connect. Hello and welcome to Stand With Us Connect, coming to you live from Israel. Thank you for joining us. As you know, Stand With Us is working around the clock, supporting Israel and fighting anti-Semitism, and it's great to connect with you. We have another great show for you today. Coming up, I'll be joined by Israel's ambassador to the UK. Just before that, we want to let you know about a movie premiere that's happening next week, a new film produced by Stand With Us called Minority of One, one man's journey from hatred to freedom. Minority of One tells the story of Hussein Abu Bakr, a former political refugee from Cairo, Egypt. The premiere is happening on Monday, June 22nd. Don't miss it. Now, today's show is streaming all across Stand With Us digital platforms, and it's never been easier to get involved. You can post a comment during the show, and you'll see it come up across the screen. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or any of our platforms, you can post questions in the comments to be asked live, so please do get interactive with us. And don't forget that if you love the work of Stand With Us and you want to support it, you can do so at standwithus.com/donate. Now, my guest today is someone who I've known and respected for many years. He has 25 years of experience in Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he's considered one of the great Israeli spokespeople of our day, I would say, of all time. He served in Hong Kong, Washington, and Beijing. He was formerly the Prime Minister's advisor and international spokesperson for over 8 years. Now he's Israel's ambassador to the Court of St. James, which is, as you know, the proper way to say he's Israel's top diplomat in Britain. Joining us now from London, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome our friend, His Excellency, Ambassador Mark Regev. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank you and all the team and Stand With Us for what you do to help make the case for Israel on campuses, online. I think it's a wonderful job you're doing.
Thank you so much. How have you and your family been doing during these crazy few months?
Well, the truth is, as ambassador, you have a crazy schedule. I think after a working day, a lot of people like to go home and relax. And as ambassador, at the end of the working day, you find you've got a reception to go to and a speech to give and a talk to attend. There's always an event in the evenings, and COVID-19, I suddenly found I had all these free evenings, which was good for my reading, but I wasn't used to the action.
Good for us too. And we had some breaking news, of course, just yesterday when it was announced that you'll be leaving shortly as ambassador after serving for 5 years, I believe it is.
Over four.
So this is your goodbye interview.
In many ways, I don't know if it's a goodbye interview, but it's definitely going to be the last, as far as I know. This is the last such web event that I'm going to do as ambassador.
So thank you so much for making time for us. Looking back at your time as Israel's ambassador to the UK, what stands out the most?
Oh, you're asking me to say out of 4 years, 4+ years, what was the highlight of my time here in Britain? So I would have to point to 3. Have you got patience to hear all 3?
Certainly have.
Last year, 2019, I went up to an RAF base in northern England, and I saw Israeli Air Force pilots who came to Britain to train with the Royal Air Force. And it's the first time we'd had such an exercise together with British and Israeli pilots training. Now, you know that our Israeli pilots are pretty good, and they know they're good. And some Israelis would even say Israeli Air Force pilots can sometimes even be a bit cocky about their professional prowess, yes? And yet they were very happy to be here in Britain to train with their RAF, with their British counterparts, because they have a great respect for their professionalism. And the truth is, when Israeli pilots train with British pilots, or when Israeli pilots train with American pilots, we learn from each other. And our air forces get better, which means our countries, our democracies are better protected. And we didn't used to do this sort of thing with Britain. We've seen over the last few years a serious upgrade in the defense relationship, in the security relationship. I think that's good for both countries. As I said, the people, the citizens of both our countries are safer because our defense forces are more equipped to meet the challenges because of these sort of joint exercises. So that was one high point. I'll tell you a funny story. I was at this RAF base and they had organized a little mini Israeli Air Force camp inside the RAF base, and you'll have to know that there was kosher food. Because, of course, in Israeli government army, all food served to soldiers has to be kosher. And I think it was the first time in this RAF base in England that you had a kosher kitchen established and literally dozens of kosher meals being offered, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Quite a thing.
Very nice. I wonder if we can get to the big issue of the day. It looks like Prime Minister Netanyahu has a majority for applying Israeli sovereignty over Jewish areas in Judea and Samaria, or as the West Bank as it's known. And some people refer to this as annexation. What is the latest with this issue? And if it takes place, why would that move be justified?
So, first of all, I agree with you. I don't think the term annexation is correct, because annexation means you're taking something that's not yours. And Israel has always said we've got a legitimate claim to the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, a legal claim, a historic claim, a security claim. And the truth is, all Israeli governments since 1967 have always said, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about Labour governments or Likud governments, all Israeli governments have always said that we will not return to the 1967 lines. Those lines were not lines of peace. They were lines of conflict. They were not secure borders because we had conflict after conflict on those borders. And all Israeli governments since the Six-Day War have consistently said that we want secure borders, and those aren't the borders of 1967. Is there an opportunity now to get international recognition, primarily American recognition, of new frontiers for Israel? This is an aspiration that consecutive Israeli governments have had. One of the areas under specific study is, of course, the Jordan Valley. The Jordan Valley is that strategic piece of land that runs parallel along the Jordan River on the western side, which Israeli governments have always spoken about its importance for the security of Israel. There are other areas as well that are being under discussion. Of course, we'll do this in a responsible way. Obviously, we want to be as coordinated as we can with our American friends. We're talking to our other allies and partners, including, the government of the United Kingdom. We're very aware of the concerns in the region. We want to make sure that the peace treaties with our neighbors stay strong. We don't want to do something that would cause great instability. We will navigate this in a responsible way, but the hope is that we can move ahead on this in a way that will make Israel stronger and more secure.
And there has been some opposition. There's been support as well, obviously. A letter was published in Haaretz where some 40 British Jews, among them some well-known figures, criticized this potential move. And they wrote publicly and you replied publicly. Can you summarize your response to that letter?
Well, first of all, just as you've got a diversity of opinion in Israel, you've got a diversity of opinion in Jewish communities across the world. I think that's natural. No one expects us to be North Koreans, that everyone follows the party line. Yes, debate is healthy, debate is a good thing. Though I would say I think it's important that we all respect Israeli democracy. I mean, we have a democratic process in Israel. As you know, Michael, we voted 3 times in a 12-month period.
Yes.
And the Israeli voters have chosen, and I think there should be a respect for the democratic decisions taken by the Israeli body politic, yes? But everyone's entitled to their opinion. And I responded and I said what needed to be said. I said that the idea that parts of the West Bank should be staying as part of Israel in any possible future scenario, that goes back to the Labour governments of the late 1960s and early 1970s. The Alon Plan, which was developed under the premiership of Prime Minister Golda Meir, talked about the strategic importance of the Golan Heights and of the Jordan Valley, which I spoke about a moment ago. In 1981, Menachem Begin, then Prime Minister, officially brought the Golan Heights under Israeli sovereignty. It wasn't done with the Jordan Valley, and that's being considered now. You should know about the importance of the Jordan Valley. Once again, this isn't an idea that's just, let's say, espoused by the Israeli right. The Israeli center and the center left have also adopted this. Yitzhak Rabin, great Israeli prime minister, a man who who dedicated his life to the security of Israel through the military, who led the Israeli military, he was the commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the Israeli military, our most highest officer in uniform at the time of the Six-Day War, afterwards goes into politics as prime minister, forges the Oslo agreements with the Palestinians. In other words, here's a man who's committed fundamentally to the security of Israel. And at the same time, he wants to try to reach arrangements with our neighbors to try to forge peace between Israel and the Palestinians. He gave a speech in the Knesset where he talked about his vision of final status peace with the Palestinians. And this speech was tragically given just weeks before he was assassinated. He was murdered by a terrible Jewish extremist. But Rabin, in this speech, Rabin, who's so much committed to peace, he said that the Jordan Valley would have to stay part of Israel in any final status arrangement. Now, let's be clear. Rabin believed in peace. Rabin believed in reconciliation. You could even say that Rabin paid for his belief in peace with his life. He was shot by an extremist who was opposed to the process. And he believed that peace could go hand in hand with Israel keeping large parts of the West Bank that were vital for our security. Now, if he believed it, I think other people should think very seriously about this before they criticize.
And so to people who say that this potential move makes peace less likely, how do you answer that?
I would say the contrary is true, because peace can be artificial. It can be on a piece of paper. It can be in a UN resolution, but to be on the ground, peace has to be based on reality. And there is no peace that will endure that isn't anchored in security. You have to have ironclad security arrangements for peace to endure. And therefore, you need those territorial changes so Israel can protect itself. If Israel does not have secure borders, peace will not endure. This is part of the trade-offs that have to be in any arrangement for final status reality. Now, you could say maybe for a British ear or an American ear or a Canadian ear, people say, well, why do you need security if you've got peace? The peace will give you security. Unfortunately, that's not true. It's simply not true. And the best example of this is in the 1990s when the Oslo process was moving ahead so aggressively, so energetically. Israel was actually pulling out of areas in the West Bank as part of the agreements with the Palestinians. That very same period, we saw this escalation in suicide bombings. We had buses being blown up. We had scores of Israelis being murdered by terrorists. And then the so-called experts said, well, you have to understand these terrorist groups like Hamas, like Islamic Jihad, they are the enemies of peace. And today, of course, when they attack us, the excuse is because there is no peace. The truth is they attack us because that's their raison d'etre, that's who they are. But if tomorrow an Israeli and a Palestinian leader were to sign a peace treaty, it's true that the governments of the United States and Great Britain would congratulate us. But those same extremist groups would actually escalate their violence like they did in the 1990s in order to try to destroy the chances of peace. And a peace that can't be defended, a peace not anchored in security, will simply be washed away. Peace that's not anchored in security will not survive. And that's why you have to have that synthesis between security and peace. One cannot go without the other.
I would remind our viewers that if they want to learn more about the issues related to Judea and Samaria at the West Bank, they can get this booklet from our website at standwithus.com/learn. It's always good to learn as much as you can, know the facts, and particularly when you can't visit Israel right now. So take a look at that, standwithus.com/learn. Plenty more educational information there. And Mr. Ambassador, I can tell you we've got thousands of people who are tuning in from around the world, from Belgium, from Thailand, from Brazil, from the Netherlands, from England and Scotland. I'm sure by the end we'll have all of the British Isles tuning in if we don't already. Of course, the American embassy moved to Jerusalem. I was there. It was quite a historic day. And some other countries are cautiously following suit and some are considering moves. So should the UK move its embassy too?
Definitely, as should everyone. And I've made the case, but unfortunately, Michael, I have yet to be successful on this particular issue.
There's a small amount of time, though.
Maybe my successor will succeed on this one. The truth is, it's discrimination against Israel. Why? Because there's a norm in international behavior. There's a norm in the way countries relate to each other. And that norm is every country on the planet gets to choose its own capital city, and the other members of the international community respect that right. How do we know that, Michael? Because we've got many examples of countries that have actually changed their capital city, and the international community doesn't leave its embassies in the former capital, they move them. So the Chinese, after the revolution of 1949, they moved their capital from Nanjing to Beijing. No one left their embassies in Nanjing. They moved them to Beijing. The Turks, after the revolution of Ataturk, they moved their capital from Istanbul to Ankara. People respected that. No one leaves their embassy in the former capital. Most recently, in modern European history, the Germans, after unification, they moved the capital of the Federal Republic from Bonn to Berlin. No one left their embassy in Bonn. Everyone respected the right of the German people to choose their own capital city. Even some people like Margaret Thatcher in this country, who wasn't so excited about German unification. Nevertheless, the British embassy was moved from Bonn to Berlin. Only in the case of Israel is this universal norm not applied. Only in the case of Israel do people say, we don't respect your right as a sovereign, independent country to choose your own capital city. And in the case of Jerusalem, it's particularly egregious because Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people, not since the founding of the State of Israel, but this goes back 3,000 years to the time of the Bible. And to ignore the Jewish connection to Jerusalem over so many centuries is to ignore reality.
Taking to a different topic now, the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn was notoriously anti-Israel, and his tenure continues to be under investigation by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission for Anti-Semitism. Can you reflect on Labour relations with Israel historically and now?
Well, let's look at the last 4 Labour Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom. You had Harold Wilson, you had James Callaghan, you had Tony Blair, and you had Gordon Brown. All 4 of them, 100% of the last 4 Labour Prime Ministers were pro-Israel. Harold Wilson, great friend of Israel. Callaghan, great friend of Israel. Same for Tony Blair, same for Gordon Brown. And that's because historically, the Labour Party in this country was a bastion of solidarity for Israel. There was a special relationship between the Israeli Labour Party and the British Labour Party. And there was a solidarity and a special relationship that existed there for many years. Obviously, you say correctly, that was all put under a lot of tension during recent years. We now have a new Labour leadership in this country, in the United Kingdom, and I hope that we'll see the UK Labour Party go back to that sort of traditional approach of moral solidarity with the Jewish state. I think that's the right thing to do, and I hope we see it.
And during your time, the front line in the battle against anti-Semitic BDS boycotts has been fought mainly across the academic world, universities, faculties, but also in the cultural and business realm. Is BDS winning or losing?
I want you to know that they're losing. They're losing in the real world. BDS, maybe Britain is one of the epicenters of BDS on the planet. They're very, very active in this country. And yet every year that I've been here, we've seen UK-Israel trade increase. The Brits are buying Israeli products. Do you know that after the United States, Britain is quite possibly the second largest market for Israeli exports on the planet? I say quite often because sometimes it's China, but recently it was Britain and then it was China again. But Britain is the largest market for Israeli exports in this whole European sphere. That's for sure. More than Germany, more than France, more than Italy, more than Spain. And if the BDS movement, if their slogan is don't buy Israeli products, guess what? It doesn't appear that people are listening. The numbers show Israeli products, Israeli innovation, Israeli technology. The Brits want it. The Brits want to buy it. And we see the economic relationship between Britain and Israel go from strength to strength to strength. So in the real world, BDS is an astounding failure. Where does BDS have traction? In the periphery. You'll see it in university campuses, and you'll see it sometimes in a trade union. You'll see it maybe in some local government. In a world where you have more theatrical politics, we have to fight BDS not because they're winning, they're losing. We have to fight it because it's wrong, because it's defamation, and ultimately, I believe it's a modern manifestation of the world's oldest hatred, which is anti-Semitism. I mean, I'd ask you a question, Michael. Let's say instead of you being the activist and running Stand With Us the way you do, let's pretend for a moment that you're a university professor somewhere in Scotland. And let's say, Michael, you've called for a boycott of Israel because you disagree with Israeli policy, let's say. Then I come to you and I say, and tell me, who else have you called for a boycott of? Have you called for a boycott of the Iranian regime? Have you called for a boycott of, did you call for a boycott of Iraq under the Ba'athist dictatorship? Did you call for a boycott of Assad's Syria or of Gaddafi's Libya? And most often than not, the answer is no, no, and no. You've only called for a boycott of Israel. And Israel isn't in that league. Israel's a democracy. We have elections, a free press, freedom of religion, a free trade union movement, free universities, independent judiciary. But you've called for a boycott of Israel and you haven't called for a boycott of all these other countries. So you have to ask the obvious question. And that is, what is it about the Jewish state that you find so morally reprehensive? What is it about the Jewish state that arouses your indignation? And maybe it is precisely because it's the Jewish state.
A point well made. I'd like to say hi to our viewers from Papua New Guinea, Chile, Canada, Sweden, Norway, Australia, the United States, South Africa, and Spain. We have, as befits a diplomatic show, we have a United Nations of viewers today for you, Mr. Ambassador. You are a former spokesperson for the Prime Minister. You're a career diplomat. What are the central messages that you want other countries to know and the general public to know, first and foremost, about Israel?
I think people should know that, first of all, Israel can make a mistake. Okay, Israel's a normal country with normal people, but Israel is a success story. Undoubtedly, Israel is almost an unprecedented success story. If you think of where we were in 1948, when Israel declared its independence, and where we are today in 2020, Israel is undoubtedly one of the modern world's most astounding success stories. We've built in the Middle East a thriving, robust democracy. Now, you might say, oh, we can yawn at that. You know, you can't yawn at that. Israel is a beacon in a region that is characterized by autocratic, theocratic, dictatorial regimes. You take that huge landmass of the greater Middle East from Morocco on the Atlantic shore in the west, and you go all the way to the east to Central Asia, countries like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. You have maybe 30 countries. You have a couple of 100 million people. Not one democracy except for Israel. Not one democracy. Israel is the only country where human rights are respected. Israel is the only country where there is rule of law. Israel is the only country where there is separation of powers. Israel is the only country with a free press. Israel is the only country which has democratic elections which are really competitive and an elected parliament that really has power. So I think we can be proud of that. And anyone who believes in freedom and democracy should be showing solidarity with Israel. Secondly, Israel used to be an agricultural country. Israel used to be a place we were famous for our Jaffa oranges. Today, we're famous for our apples, but we're talking about Apple Macs and so forth. Israel produces technology. Israel is producing the technology, the innovation that is making this planet more prosperous and more safe. Israeli medical technology is saving lives. Israeli agricultural technology is providing food in barren areas. We're providing irrigation in deserts. Israeli technology is making a positive impact on the world, making a positive impact on humanity, and will continue to do so. Thirdly, despite all the bad news, people don't know that Israel's relations with our Arab neighbors have never been better. Obviously, the newspapers focus on what's going wrong. That's the job of newspapers. But if one takes a deep breath and looks at the macro picture, today, Israel is talking to more Arab countries than ever before in the history of the Jewish state. We have peace treaties with two of our most important Arab neighbors, both with Egypt and with Jordan. And in addition to that, we are speaking to Arab countries across North Africa, across the Gulf. If there are 20 members of the Arab League, today Israel is speaking to at least half of them. Sometimes it's open and above board, sometimes a little more discreet. But in the Arab world, there is a growing recognition that Israel is a legitimate part of the region. That's good for the region, that's good for our relations with these countries, and it's good for peace. I think people aren't aware of that story, and they should be more aware of that story. I would like to say one more thing about Israel, and people forget this. Israel has fundamentally changed the position of the Jewish people on this planet. In my father's generation, the Jews were persecuted, the Jews were homeless, the Jews were defenseless, the Jews were stateless. Jews pleaded, knocked on doors of countries in the 1930s, please let us in. Don't entrap us in Europe to face the Nazis. People wanted to flee in countries, wouldn't let them in. They had to beg people to protect them, beg people to take them in, and some countries did take them in, but there wasn't an answer for the Jewish people. Millions were trapped in Europe. Today, the Jewish people are sovereign and free and independent in their homeland. And if we need to, we can defend ourselves against those who would do us harm. That's a fundamental transformation in the Jewish people. We now have the right of national self-determination in our homeland, and we are exercising that right. And those people who say, we've got nothing against Jews, we just don't think there should be an Israel. Well, the truth is, you want to return us back to the pre-Israel period when the Jews were defenseless and homeless and stateless. And I'm sorry, we refuse to go back there. We want to be free, we want to be independent, we want to be strong, we want to be sovereign. We have fundamentally changed the situation of the Jews on this planet, and that's a good thing.
Such an important reminder for everyone. And I'll remind our audience also that you can send your comments by posting them on whatever social media you're posting on. They'll come up across the screen. Tell us where you're watching from. Send us your greetings and also questions, and we'll put them to the ambassador towards the end of the show. Ambassador, you've attended Stand With Us events across the UK. You've been to campuses. You've made it your business to go to university campuses. You've hosted conferences for our student leaders at the embassy. Are you confident in support for Israel in the British community, and particularly among the next generation, and wider than the Jewish British community as well?
So I'd say the following. I believe it's important that we make our case on university campuses precisely because the other side, the detractors of Israel, are so active. Think of it, if you're a student at a university in the United Kingdom, or for that matter in the United States, and you've come to study at university, and the whole 3-4 years that you're getting your degree, you only hear the other side. And the other side is active. And by being involved, whether it's a group like Stand With Us or someone from the Israeli embassy in London going to a campus and talking, you are exposing people to another view that they wouldn't hear otherwise. So it's crucial. It's crucial that we're there on campus making the case for the state of Israel.
With so much going on around the world and in Israel, I guess few people are paying attention to the threat of Iran. But the Iranian regime remains a clear and present danger. And there have been recent developments that people should know about. Can you update us about Iran's nuclear program and other threats that their regime poses to Israel and to regional security in the Middle East?
Well, the Iranians, first of all, they're a threat to Israel, but they're not only a threat to Israel. They're a threat to the region. And one of the reasons that we've seen Israel and the Arab states become closer over the last few years is precisely because we're all threatened by Iran, and the common threat has brought us together with the Arabs. But even more than that, I want to say something, Michael, that people aren't aware of. The Iranians are working to create even longer range missiles. Now, let's be clear. They already have missiles that can reach Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. They've already got missiles that can reach Riyadh and other Saudi cities. If they're building longer range missiles, it's not to hit targets in the Middle East. They don't need that. If they want longer range missiles, it's because they want the ability to hit targets in Europe and beyond. And this is a regime that just, I think a few days ago, the International Atomic Energy Agency came out with formal complaints that they're not allowing verification. They're not living up to their legal commitments under their membership of the IAEA. They're back down on their things that they committed to do under the JCPOA, under the International Nuclear Agreement. And this is a regime that, one, has this nefarious nuclear program, two, is building ballistic missiles to carry the nuclear warheads when they make them. This is a regime that sponsors terrorist organizations, not just supports them, but actually sponsors them, arms them, funds them, trains them, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and more. This is a regime that's involved in establishing militias under its control across the Arab world, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in other places. This is a regime that is fundamentally aggressive, fundamentally destabilizing. And the problem is not Iran, the people. Israel used to have a good relationship with Iran. It's the leadership which is stuck in this revolutionary Islamist, Khomeiniist outlook, which is to export their version of the Islamic revolution, and it's a threat to us all. And if I can speak frankly, Michael, if you put your head in the sand like the proverbial ostrich and pretend the threat is not there, guess what? The threat doesn't go away. One has to look at the threat realistically, and one has to counter the threat. And we have to keep the pressure up on Iran, and we have to beef up, increase the pressure on Iran. And the bottom line is this: if Iran wants to be treated like a normal country, maybe it should first start acting like a normal country. And normal countries don't support terrorist organizations. Normal countries don't run for nuclear weapons in violation of their IAEA commitments. Normal countries don't have private militias in different countries. Normal countries don't cause instability in their neighborhoods. So I'd say to the Iranians, you want to be treated like a normal country? Start acting like one. Until you do, we're going to keep the pressure on. Specifically for Israel, we're very worried over the last couple of years what they're doing in Syria. There's no doubt the Iranians have kept Assad in power. Without Iranian support, Assad, his brutal dictatorship, would have fallen. The Iranians kept him in power, and now that he seems to have won the civil war, the Iranians want to use Syria as a satellite. They want to establish in Syria forward positions for the Iranian military right on Israel's border. We can't accept this. We won't accept this, and we're acting to prevent it from happening.
I want to turn to some of the questions from our audience. Cheryl is in Durban, South Africa. She says, are you more or less hopeful about the prospect of peace than you were 10 years ago?
Cheryl, I'm very upbeat because as I said a moment ago, we're seeing these new relations with the Arab world. I mean, think about it. Countries that in the past were either hostile to Israel, who saw themselves as enemies of Israel, are today talking to Israel. I mean, we fought some terrible wars with both Egypt and Jordan. With both of them, we've got peace treaties. We're talking to other Arab countries across the Gulf, in North Africa, countries that in the past would not have spoken to us. Recently, the Prime Minister of Israel met the leader of Sudan. Sudan was the country of the Khartoum Declaration after the '67 war, which said no negotiations with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no peace with Israel, the famous 3 no's. There's a fundamental change going on in the Arab world. Israel, which was once seen almost universally as an enemy, today you've got people in the Arab world who understand that there's an interest in having better relations with Israel, and that Israel is a legitimate part of the region. So the big picture in the Middle East is actually very, very positive. We're seeing an increasing Arab acceptance of Israel as a legitimate part of the region, an increasing willingness to work together with Israel, an increasing understanding that Israel is here to stay and can be a good partner. Now, the Palestinians aren't there yet, unfortunately. But ultimately, the Palestinians are an integral part of the Arab world. They self-identify as a proud part of the Arab world. And as the Arab world is openly embracing Israel, as the Arab world is more open to accept Israel, as the Arab world sees Israel as a legitimate part of the region, that ultimately has to affect the Palestinians in a positive way too. It's only a matter of time.
Mr. Ambassador, Bethany's in Michigan. She's asking, do you agree that Israel is singled out at the United Nations?
Bethany, of course it is. Of course, excuse me. Of course it is. I'll give you the best example. There's a UN body called the UN Human Rights Council, which was established theoretically many years ago to support human rights. What does this council do? It targets the only country in the Middle East that really actually is a democracy and respects human rights. The UN Human Rights Council has spent more time passing resolutions against democratic Israel than it has against dictatorial Syria or dictatorial North Korea or dictatorial Libya or dictatorial Iraq, dictatorial Iran. One after the other, they've spent more time attacking Israel than all those dictatorships put together. So you have to ask the question, why is this happening? This is institutionalized anti-Semitism. There's no reason for this whatsoever. And unfortunately, it's not only in that organization. In other UN bodies, you see this automatic ganging up of Israel, attacking Israel like no other country. Now, I know that Israel is imperfect. Perfection is not in this planet, but I also know this. that we don't deserve this level of hatred that we get from the UN. It's just ridiculous. And you should know, it's not just Mark Regev who says the UN has been unbalanced on Israel. Many objective people have said it as well, including consecutive Secretary Generals of the United Nations have pointed to this bias, this obsession against Israel that unfortunately characterizes so many UN bodies.
Dan is in Helsinki. He is saying, are the Palestinian Authority partners for peace? I mean, you've got Mahmoud Abbas, who is now serving, I think, the 15th year of a 4-year term. Israelis have held 7 elections in that time. So Dan's question is, are the Palestinian Authority partners for peace?
We don't rule them out, and we hope they can be. But the Palestinians appear to have taken a decision a few years ago and have stuck to it that they refuse to talk to Israel. They refuse to engage with Israel. They've decided that they don't want to engage and negotiate with Israel, and they've adopted a unilateral strategy where they say we go to the United Nations and we ask for unilateral recognition of Palestine as a state. And they go to parliaments in Europe, including in the United Kingdom, and they say we want recognition unilaterally as a state, and they're saying we want a state without peace with Israel. Now, the truth is, what they're doing is in violation of their own commitments in the Oslo Agreement, because they made a signed commitment to say they would solve all outstanding issues through peaceful negotiations. That was a commitment that Arafat gave at the very beginning of the process, which they've clearly broken. But forget the legalistics. They're doing a fundamental disservice to their own people. The Palestinian leadership is betraying the Palestinian people. Why? You can go to the UN and you can get a resolution against Israel, or you can go to a European country and get a resolution in the parliament also against Israel. You could even get recognition of a Palestinian state, but guess what? It's all just pieces of paper. Let's say you pass a resolution at the United Nations, anti-Israel, easy to do. That's the way the UN is, unfortunately. And you have a big party in Ramallah celebrating your victory at the UN. The next morning you wake up and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. It's just a piece of paper. And by adopting this unilateral strategy of refusing to negotiate with Israel, they are doing their own people a disservice. In fact, they're condemning their own people to the status quo. It's this strategy of Palestinian rejectionism is the most primary victims of it are the Palestinian people themselves, because they get meaningless pieces of paper and they don't actually bring anything tangible for their own people. The only way to get something tangible for their people is to negotiate in good faith with Israel, which they refuse to do. But as you know, Michael, this is unfortunately disappointing, but it's not surprising. Over the decades, this has been a consistent pattern of behavior in the Palestinian political leadership. The first compromise solution that was put on the table between Israelis and Palestinians, between Jews and Palestinians, was in the 1930s. It was put on the table by the British. It was called the Peel Commission Plan, which sort of called for basically a two-state solution back then. The Zionist movement accepted in principle the British proposals, totally rejected by the Arab side, by the Palestinian leadership. They said all or nothing. 10 years after that, in 1947, the UN put a compromise proposal on the table. Once again, accepted in principle by our side, rejected by the Palestinians, who said all or nothing. You know, earlier this year, we celebrated Israel's 72nd Independence Day. Wonderful event. We celebrate. Independence Day is a genuine day of celebration in Israel because no one appreciates independence like a country that has had to struggle for its independence. The Palestinians, in parallel, commemorate what they call the Nakba, that's Arabic for catastrophe. We celebrate our independence, and they commemorate what they call the catastrophe. But let's be clear. I asked the following question. Why are Palestinians not celebrating 72 years of an independent Palestinian state? There was a UN proposal on the table. It was accepted by Israel. Who rejected Palestinian statehood in 1947? It wasn't us. It was the Palestinian leadership. And it's time, I think, younger Palestinians had a serious look at their own leadership's track record. And that's the same thing today when they reject talks with Israel, where they refuse to engage. They're doing their people no favors.
We have viewers from Panama, from Puerto Rico, from France, from Northern Ireland. I told you we get every part of the UK, and here it is, Wales. A question from Wales. Carolyn Webster is asking, she says, I believe we have a lot in common, and I would like to see a more Israeli investment in Welsh industry. Do you see more cooperation between Israel and Wales in the future?
So as part of my duties as ambassador, I visit in all regions of the United Kingdom, and I've been to Wales. And I remember visiting a high-tech factory that was a joint venture between Israel and an Israeli company and a Welsh company. And it was an amazing success story because Israeli technology can be very relevant to British industry. And I saw a specific example of that in Wales when I visited, and I hope we see much more, because ultimately that sort of joint venture is prosperity and progress for both Israel and, in this case, for Wales as well. Can I just mention, though, if we've got a questioner from Wales, we remember in Israel very, very clearly David Lloyd George, who was the British Prime Minister during the First World War and immediately after. He was the British Prime Minister at the time the British government launched the Balfour Declaration. He was a Welshman, he was a Zionist, and you should know that this Welsh Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, there are streets named after him in all big Israeli cities. There's a Lloyd George Street in Tel Aviv, there's a Lloyd George Street in Jerusalem, there's a Lloyd George Street in Haifa. This Welshman is celebrated in Israel, and for very good reason.
Absolutely. Stefano in Trieste has got a very important question, Mr. Ambassador. He says, how did you feel when Israel won and hosted the Eurovision Song Contest?
It was great. It was really good. It was very exciting. And you know what was interesting? I thought it was informative to a certain extent. I don't know if you'll agree with me. But in the vote of the experts, yes, Israel didn't come out on top. Israel was close to the top, but we didn't come out number one. But when it turned to the people, the viewers, to ring in to give their response, then Israel jumped to the top. And I think that says something about Israel's position in the world. Sometimes the elites, those who are the masters of the way to think, yes, maybe they're a little standoffish sometimes, but the people, when they get to vote, understand that Israel is offering something good. I'll tell you a story. I live here, obviously, in London until I finish my job, yes? And I've been watching more television than ever before because, as I said, because of COVID-19, I'm at home more than ever before.
Sure.
And I go to someone like Netflix here in the UK. Do you know how many Israeli television series are on? And they're not for the Israelis who live in the United Kingdom, let's be clear. Mm-hmm. There aren't enough of us to make it economically viable. We are producing very, very creative cultural programs, whether it's Israeli movies or Israeli television series. I have to tell you, I had so many people come up to me and talk to me about Fauda. I'd never watched it. I had to go watch it because everyone was presuming, as the Israeli ambassador, I'd seen it all. And that's just one example of Israeli culture that is a number one Israeli export, and that is very exciting, and it's got the world interested in what Israel is producing.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you caught up on Fauda. If at least during this time, then you made use of the time you were able to. I'm glad. There's a new series of Shtisel apparently being filmed, so that should be next on the list. Now, as you know, Stand With Us is a big global movement. It's also a family. And I know that your daughter was a Stand With Us fellow. And you have always, as ambassador, given your time generously, whether it was meeting our students here in Israel at our Ambassadors Club program, our international student program, meeting our Israeli student fellows, our Emerson fellows in the UK, being a guest at our events, or hosting our sixth form program at the embassy, or even meeting our solidarity missions in Israel. So since you'll be shortly concluding your position, we have a little surprise. We made you a little video reel of some of your highlights with Stand With Us and as ambassador. Take a look. So much more we could have included. So Ambassador Mark Regev, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Any final message you want to give to our viewers around the world?
So first of all, I want to thank you for what you do. It's not by accident that I was always happy to accept invitations to speak at your events. It's because I support your mission. I think it's important that non-government organizations like Stand With Us fight the good fight for Israel, stand up to some of the bigotry, some of the prejudice, some of the fabrications that are said about Israel. It's true. I've got a family connection, and I should have probably declared that at the beginning. I don't want to be accused of having a conflict of interest, but I do know this, yes, that you're doing important work, and I would have supported it even without the fact that my daughter became a fellow. And I want to say to all your fellows, and I've met so many of them here in the United Kingdom, you do really important work. Really important work. You're filling a vacuum. You're making the case. If you weren't there, think of it. The other side could well have a monopoly on speech. You are balancing off the playing field. You're giving the other side a run for its money. And for that, I say Toda Rabah, thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your service to the state of Israel. So many people watching greatly appreciate it and have said so throughout the broadcast. And you'll always be part of our family. So thank you very, very much. And we wish you much success into the future. Well done and thank you.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Thank you. So join us again on Monday at the same time. We'll have the global movie premiere of Minority of One man's journey from hatred to freedom. It's an amazing film, and come and see it on Monday at the same time. It was a pleasure to connect with you today. If you can't come to Israel, we'll bring Israel to you. Thank you for standing with us. Shalom from Israel.